If you're a facilities manager at a university, you know students rely on the cafeteria for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and the occasional late-night snack. So when a dishwasher breaks down and dirty plates pile up, the mess hall can turn messy in the blink of an eye. Enter Grainger. With over 1 million industrial-grade products and fast delivery, the product you need now is never far away. So you can turn that dishwasher back into a lean, clean washing machine. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report Aftershow. We have with us still attorney Doug Caddy, the attorney for the original Watergate 7 burglars. Fascinating information about the JFK assassination. And now he's telling us that the last time he shook hands with E. Howard Hunt told him that one of the motivations for the Kennedy assassination was the alien presence. Now, Doug, I got to ask you, do you think it's possible that maybe Hunt said that to you as kind of a curveball to kind of set you off the track?
No, I don't think so at all. You have to understand my friendship with Howard Hunt, which went back many years, and also what we both had gone through. It wasn't anything like that at all. When I'm asked about the way I view the alien presence is this, okay? I think the issue of whether there is a group such as Majestic 12, or successors, is easy to explain, actually. If you are President of the United States and you are presented with credible evidence that there is an alien presence visiting the planet Earth, would you not, as President, set up a small group of individuals comprised of the best minds in our country that would study and deal with the alien presence and advise you if you were given this evidence? Would you not do that? And then if you were president and never were given any credible evidence at all that there was an alien presence, you would not set up such a group. But I think it's pretty clear that President Truman did set up such a group, and originally it was called Majestic 12, and Dr. Donald Mazzell was one of its members. There's been successors to it. In other words, there have been many individuals come and go from that group. I mean, some have died, and many have died, put it that way, and so forth. It still continues. I think it's been captured to a great extent by corporate America, working with the intelligence community, and it may have lost some of its initial purposes, as I'll explain. But when Kennedy was approached with this by Dr. Howard Mansell, one of the first things he did when he became president is he issued National Security Action Memorandum 55, in which he took away from the CIA and the State Department really to have the ability to put input in decisions on on Vietnam, on foreign policy, and he did so he could get a closer look at what Majestic 12 was doing. In other words, the CIA was so by giving it to the Defense Department, he would be able to spy on the CIA, which is a key part of the operation of Majestic 12. In fact, I think Allen Dulles was either the chairman or a key person on Majestic 12 at one point in time, which is why Kennedy had to be assassinated. And so that was an attempt on his part. And the next thing he did was he met with Khrushchev in Vienna in 1961 and started broaching to Khrushchev thawing of the relationship between the two major enemy powers, the Soviet Union and the United States. And then he assigned a number 2 administrator at NASA, NSA, the Aeronautics and Space Administration, to work with his counterpart. He did this in '62, to work with his counterpart in the Soviet Union on the joint exploration of outer space between the United States and the Soviet Union. And then he made his speech at American University in June of 1963, at which he advocated peace and advocated a thawing of the relationship between the two major powers. And then in September, just 2 months before he was assassinated, he went before the United Nations and gave a major speech in which he said the exploration of outer space and the landing on the moon is a matter of not just for one country, is a matter of a joint operation, and I propose that the Soviet Union and the United States engage in this. And he had actually sent, behind the scenes, sent emissaries to meet with Khrushchev to get Khrushchev's support for this, and actually the Soviet Union was on board for doing this. The last thing that Kennedy did, which was just 10 days before he died, was to issue National Security Action Memorandum 271, in which he formally announced that it was American foreign policy to cooperate with the Soviet Union on the exploration of outer space and landing on the moon. And this is a national security memorandum that he sent to all major officials in the government, and he signed it personally to emphasize this was his decision. And of course, the decision to assassinate him, the plans had already been laid way in advance, but this was just adding fuel to the fire to get him assassinated. In other words, there were people in the CIA and the military and so forth that the idea of relaxing our relationship with the Soviet Union was just unbelievable. You know, there is a military intelligence complex that really has at its heart the making of money for those individuals involved in it. They've all gotten extremely rich out of this, and many, many people have out of making war. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, then it became terrorism. Now it's a war on terrorism. We've always have to have a war so these people can get rich. And so Kennedy was marked for assassination when he started making these emission moves about finding out what Majestic 12 was about, what the alien presence was about. And he was about ready to, and he may have already approached with Khrushchev discussions with Khrushchev with the Soviet Union, or he was about ready to do so, on joint cooperation on dealing with the alien presence. And so these people in this country who were opposed to it, James Angleton and the Dulles and Alan Dulles and a great number, I mean the military establishment and so forth, they viewed Kennedy as a threat, and he had to be assassinated.
Let me ask you a question real quick. Now, this document that Kennedy signed, where he declared he wanted to get into cooperation with Russia over the space program, didn't that cooperation continue after his death? Do you have any evidence of that?
No, everything changed after his death. I mean, the whole Vietnam War changed overnight. I mean, he was trying to withdraw from Vietnam, the limited forces we had in there. And LBJ immediately, within a day, changed the policy and declared make Vietnam a major war. Of course, he did that because Brown and Root, the construction firm here in Houston, that was his benefactor from the very time he ran for Congress all the way to the presidency, that was their means for becoming rich. Brown and Root became Halliburton, and then that's evolved into something else today.
Really?
And so, of course, now we think that it did evolve into a relaxation of relationship, but nothing like what Kennedy was envisioning. Kennedy was ahead of his time, in other words.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I ran into a guy once about 1995, way before I was ever doing radio or anything like that, and he told me that he worked for the space program for NASA. And he told me this long story. It's way too long to get into right now. And he says he was working with the Russians, cooperating with the Russians. And I says, oh, what do you mean, Skylab, like that? He goes, oh, no, way before that. He says, we've been cooperating with the Russians all along with the space program. What do you make of that?
Well, when you say all along, there's got to be a beginning point. The question is, when was the beginning point?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I couldn't tell you exactly right now. I couldn't tell you.
No, I mean, we're talking about 1960. We're talking about the early 1960s, that's 53 years ago. Obviously, a lot has changed since then. At a certain point, I don't doubt that we started cooperating with the Soviets. I will give you an example. A friend of mine who was a military policeman, was the security guard, was a bodyguard for one of our generals in Vietnam. And he accompanied this general in the middle of the Vietnam War. He accompanied this general to Moscow. A number of generals from Vietnam went there, and a number of generals from the Pentagon went to Moscow. And their bodyguards were put up in separate quarters. So they had wine. You could assume they had women too, and so forth, while their generals met with their counterparts in the Soviet Union. This in the midst of the Vietnam War. And what I read into that, he was telling me about that. He told me a number of really fascinating stories, really shocking stories, but about what was going on in Vietnam at that time. But I think that we were working, our military during at a certain point in the Vietnam War did start working with its counterparts, or have some discussions with its counterparts. I may be wrong about that, but I can see no other reason why they would have gone to Russia during the latter part of the Vietnam War. If it were not for that, why would they go there for a whole week to have discussions with their counterparts? What would we have in common with the Soviet Union in those days? But there's no doubt that at a certain point we became, and I think a number of countries are involved in this. I think France and Great Britain and so forth. I do believe, based on my own research, and I'm not an expert, I suggest that if people want to pursue this, that they go to the website called darkjournalist.com, which has interviews on YouTube with people who are experts on this subject of the alien presence. These people who have devoted their lives to researching it and so forth, and they can explain it much better than I can. So go to darkjournalist.com and listen to these people. But in my own mind, I'm now convinced that there is an alien presence, and that JFK was way ahead of the game, and that what he wanted to do, the presidents have been frozen out after Truman, after Eisenhower too, were frozen out of really dealing with the alien presence. Remember Clinton, when he became president, he assigned his attorney, his nominee for in the Justice Department to find out about the UFOs and the alien presence and so forth. And the fellow was never able to do that for him. But and Clinton also made the remark publicly at one time, he said, there's a government above mine over which I have no control. And there is a government above our elected government. There's a government over Obama, over every president. And this is a government that is funded independently by trillions of dollars, in my opinion, to deal with the alien presence. But there's been a lot of, in my opinion, embezzlement and fraud going on. I mean, this was started under President Truman with the Majestic 12, and that was late 1940s, and here we are in 2015. This has been going on a long time, and trillions and trillions of dollars have been spent on this. I mean, don't forget that the day before 9/11, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld announced that he could not account for $2.5 trillion that was missing from the Pentagon. And the head of the Federal Reserve testified before the Senate just a few years ago, and Senator Sanders said to him, please account for this missing money, these trillions of dollars that is missing from the Fed. And the Federal Reserve says, I don't have to answer that question. I'm not part of the Federal Reserve is not part of the government. We're an independent agency. We're actually a private bank, and so so he never answered the question. Trillions of dollars have gone out of the Fed to this operation, which is really called a super black budget. There's a black budget which Congress appropriates each year about $90 billion, and they say to these agencies, go off and do what you're supposed to do. And a few members of Congress know what is being done. But then there's this super black budget, which has trillions of dollars. And Reuters news agency about 2 months ago did an investigation, and they said they have now traced where $8.5 trillion is missing from the Defense Department. So we're talking about, our national deficit is about $18 trillion. We're talking about money that could pay off our national deficit if it were accounted for. And I think while this group that still exists, the successor to Majestic 12 still exists and is dealing with the alien presence, and And I think that we're dealing with humans as well as aliens, and when you deal with humans, you know there's going to be fraud and embezzlement. Whenever there's money around, there's going to be fraud and embezzlement. It's inevitable. So I think I call for an accounting of all these missing trillions of dollars of what's going on.
Well, what do you make of the Apollo program? Do you believe that we went to the moon, or do you think that was a slush fund as well, where money was just diverted?
I don't know anything more than what anybody else knows, but I always believe that we did go to the moon. But I know that people maintain otherwise. But there's many. Even the war in Afghanistan and in Iraq. You read about billions of dollars that just disappeared. They would deliver these, huge amounts of money that were stacked one atop another, and they just disappeared.
Yeah.
And so it's the government. These people run. It's a government above our government, and so they have the ability to do these things. And the question is, it's time for an accounting, but it may be a time for disclosure of the alien presence, and that's something that has to be decided. By those who have the proper authority, but I think the president has to be included in that. I think when Nixon was elected, Nixon under Eisenhower knew even more than Truman did about the alien presence. Eisenhower was really very clued in on this and was well aware. I think Nixon knew about 80% of what Eisenhower knew. Eisenhower did not give him the full story, but Nixon was head of the 5412 committee, which was in charge of covert operations, so he was aware of the alien presence when he was vice president. He was not elected president in 1960, but he was elected president in 1968. And what did he do the first day he was inaugurated? The first day he was inaugurated, he issued a national security decision number 2, in which he consolidated power with himself and with Kissinger and the National Security Council and with Ehrlichman and Haldeman on dealing with all matters of national security and foreign policy. And I view that as his attempt to find out what he had not, in the 8 years that he was not a part of the government, found out what the Majestic 12 and its successors knew about the alien presence. In other words, I'm not saying that if the president finds out this, they're going to say to this group, I'm abolishing you immediately. I'm just saying the president should be co-equal to this group. He should be aware of and be cognizant of the same information they have. The President of the United States should not be cut out of knowledge of this. And he probably most likely would say just continue on monitoring the alien presence. He might want to pursue where the money is going, but he would do it as a co-equal, in other words. And I think that was Nixon's intent. And I think what Nixon did, he declared war immediately when he became president, the day he became president, as opposed to Kennedy, who did this gradually. By war, I mean war upon those who were running this Majestic 12 operation, with the alien presence. Kennedy did it gradually with the conversations with Khrushchev and his public speeches at American University and the UN and the memorandums he issued and so forth. But Nixon did it the very day he became president. And in my opinion, that was the day that those people who run the government above the government decided Nixon had to go. And I think Watergate was the way they set him up. The way they set him up to go, and Watergate was how Nixon was destroyed. And I think the president since then, they don't want to pursue it. They know this is a subject if they do pursue it, it would just be the end of them and their administration. So they don't pursue it very vigorously.
Are you familiar with the account that Danny Sheehan gives? He was on the Jimmy Carter transition team.
Daniel Sheehan?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen interviews with him on YouTube and where he's talked about this. Yes, but I'm not. I'm in one or two interviews. I'm not fully aware of what he's been saying, but I know he has been saying that. He did say that the Watergate and the Kennedy assassination were were linked together. I know he did say that.
Yeah, but he also says that he had a chance to look at the Project Blue Book, I think it was.
Uh-huh.
And he saw a photograph of a UFO, and he tried to draw a picture of it real fast. He wasn't allowed to take anything out. He had to go into a room and examine the documents, and then he drew he drew sketches of it, and snuck it out in his underwear or something like that, to get it out of there.
Okay.
And I found him to be a very credible guest as well. The guys testified, argued before the Supreme Court like 25 times.
Yeah, I know he's a very, very, very able lawyer. Yeah. Absolutely. I think what we're faced with is that you and I and your listeners, we only know about 5% of what was really going on. 95% is kept from us.
Yeah.
And there are all sorts of underground bases all around the world that have been carved out. There's all sorts of things going on with outer space. Things that we're totally unaware of, and the question is whether this is and the Vatican, I think, is very much more aware of what's going on. The Vatican has its own observatory in Arizona.
Yeah.
And the Pope has even said that if there were aliens, he wanted to baptize them. That's a great way to get out of disclosing exactly what the Vatican knows about what is going on. But it's fast approaching the time where I think there has to be some sort of public discussion about this in a credible way.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, we've heard about your career and your life up until you shook hands with Howard Hunt. But what happened with your career after that? What did you do?
Well, I left Washington in 1979. I set up a head in Washington, and I came to Texas and moved to Texas, and I got a job with 1980 with the Secretary of State for the state of Texas, George Strait. That was in the administration of Governor Clements, who was a Republican governor. And my job really was like a director of elections for the state. And in essence, Texas is a huge state. When you enter from Beaumont and leave and drive to El Paso, it takes like a day and a half. It's like 680 miles or something like that. There are 254 counties in Texas, and so what I did, I traveled to most all of the counties to teach the administrators of the elections on how to use their machines. At that time, there were 6 different machines being used in different parts of Texas. And so that's what I did starting really in 1980 and 1981. And then I got a call from my friend Howard Phillips, who was one of the founders of Young Americans for Freedom. He was head of the Conservative Caucus, and he said that the Moody Foundation out of Galveston, which is a very rich and powerful foundation in Galveston, Texas, immensely wealthy foundation, they want to give us the Conservative Caucus a grant, but they can't do it because we're not a Texas organization. So he asked that I incorporate a Texas entity and get the tax exempt so that entity could get a grant and do that work within the state of Texas, inside the state of Texas. And so I left the Secretary of State's office. I incorporated the Texas Policy Institute. And actually what we did was we put on a conference in Galveston on Star Wars, which brought a lot of national experts on Star Wars. That was part of the Reagan administration, initiative.
Sure.
And so out of that, I started working with Sherman Moody. He's one of the 3 trustees of the Moody Foundation, and he got a call from Billy Saul Estes. Well, no, actually, I got a call from Jimmy Day, who was his former lobbyist. Jimmy Day had been his lobbyist in Austin, which is the state capital of Texas, but then he had gone to Washington and in the Carter administration and become a lobbyist there for other entities. And he got himself in trouble, and he ended up in federal prison in Midland, Texas. And he said to Sherman Moody, who he knew because he'd been Moody lobbyist in Austin, he said, "I have next to me Billy Saul Estes, who would like to speak to you." And so Billy Saul Estes got on the phone and said, Billy Saul Estes was, does that ring a bell with you, the name Billy Saul Estes?
No, it doesn't, no. I'm sorry, no.
Oh, well, he was, Bobby Baker and Billy Saul Estes were what nearly brought LBJ down just prior to the Kennedy assassination. They were both scandals, huge scandals that were going on that involved LBJ with those two individuals. Bobby Baker was his assistant in Washington, and Billy Saul Estes was his bag man. And
of course I am. Of course I'm familiar with Billy Saul Estes. Okay, there's a fingerprint of him is in the Gracie in the book depository, correct?
No, that's Mac Wallace, who was the stone killer that LBJ kept in the Department of Agriculture that went out and killed people when LBJ wanted them killed. But anyway, Billy Saul Estes said this was 1983.
Okay.
And Billy Saul Estes said, I want to tell my story. LBJ had died in 1973. And he said, I want to tell my story about LBJ and all the shenanigans, all the criminality, and I'd like a grant from the Moody Foundation to do so. And Sharon Moody says, well, that sounds very interesting. I'm going to send Doug Caddy up there to talk to you and see what we can do. So I went up to visit Billy Saul Estes in federal prison in Midland, Texas, in, I'd say, about June of 1983. And he explained to me he wanted to tell the crimes that had been committed by LBJ, the murders, and all the embezzlement and fraud that went on and so forth that he was deeply involved in. But he wanted a Moody Foundation grant to do this. And how and what was the best way to do it? And I said, the best way to do it would be to write a book. And you should write a book. So he said, let me think about all that. So I left him, and we didn't hear any more from Billy Saul Estes until he got out of prison in January of 1984, 6 months later, when he called Sharon Moody again and said, well, I'm out of prison, and I want to do this book. And I want to, if I can get a grant from the Moody Foundation, I want to write this book. And so I went up to meet with him in Abilene. He was a native of Abilene, Texas. And I went up to Abilene to meet with him, and he said, look, my daughter has written this book. His daughter, Pam, wrote a book while he was in prison. He gave the idea that I gave to him to his daughter. And she wrote a book, Billy Saul Estes, King of the Wheeler Dealers, which got rave reviews. I mean, it was front-page news all around the country, but all she could talk about was what happened to the family while he was in prison. She didn't really know any of the criminality, the criminal activities that he was engaged in. He had never told her anything, obviously, and for her protection and his protection, too. And he said, look, my daughter's book really didn't tell anything, and I'm ready to tell the whole story. I know the book could be a bestseller. I said, I know it could be, too. And he said, I'm a member of the Church of Christ, and the Abilene Christian University is a Church of Christ institution, and they're willing to receive the grant for me to write the book. Well, actually, I was raised in the Church of Christ. My mother was an active member of the Church of Christ. I'm an Episcopalian now, but so what we did, we went over to the Abilene Christian University and met with the president, and I said, based on what Sharon Moody has indicated to me, we probably can get a $500,000 grant from the Moody Foundation, of which $400,000 would go to Abilene Christian University to do with whatever it wanted to do, build buildings or whatever it wanted. It was entirely up to Abilene Christian University to do what it wanted to do, but $100,000 would be earmarked for Billy Saul Estes to write his book. And the president of Abilene Christian University said, well, that sounds fine with us. He knew Billy Saul, but Billy Saul was an active member of the Church of Christ. And so that's how we proceeded. And then a few months later, unbeknownst to me, because Billy Saul had introduced me to Clint Peoples, who was the U.S. Marshal for the Northern District of Texas. And Clint Peoples had been a Texas Ranger for 25 years before he became U.S. Marshal, and he had followed Billy Saul Estes and LBJ during this entire period. And during that period, Billy Saul Estes had served 2 prison terms. And he was well aware of the criminal activities of Billy Saul and of LBJ, too. And so I was introduced to Clint Peoples and became good friends of his. But I think they just forgot to tell me, but Clint Peoples arranged for Billy Saul to testify before the Robertson County Grand Jury in Robertson County, Texas, in 1984, around June, sometime in late in '84, around June or July, because one of the people that had been killed was the Department of Agriculture official in Robertson County, who was stationed in Robertson County, who had put the evidence together of the fraud committed by Billy Saul Estes on the fertilizer tanks, all the embezzlement that went on, millions of dollars had been embezzled from the government and so forth, and had gone to LBJ. And so LBJ, there was a cabal, as Billy Saul explained to me, there was a cabal of 4 men. LBJ, Cliff Carter, his assistant, Mac Wallace, who was the stone killer that LBJ kept in the Department of Agriculture, who was a graduate of the University of Texas. And then there was Billy Saul Estes. Those were the 4 individuals. LBJ, Cliff Carter, Mac Wallace, and Billy Saul Estes. And they agreed on certain murders that had to take place. And what happened was that Billy Saul Estes, after Moody Foundation said they would issue this grant, it was not formally issued, but at a certain point, Billy Saul Estes said, well, before I can write this book, I've got to get immunity from the federal government. And is there any way you can do this? And I said, well, a friend of mine is Edward Miller, who's a former assistant director of the FBI. And I had met Edward Miller because he was one of our advisors on a Moody Foundation grant dealing with terrorism. We held a conference in 1984 on terrorism. Nobody was talking about terrorism in those days, but we held a national conference. And Edward Miller was one of our advisors, and we brought in these people from all over the world to talk about terrorism. And Edward Miller says, well, I can get us in to see the Assistant Attorney General for the Stephen Trott, the Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division of the Justice Department, because Edward Miller and Mark Felt were 2 assistant FBI directors who had been indicted, prosecuted, and convicted for the black bag jobs that they did, and when they went and did black bag jobs, break-ins at the or orchestrated the break-ins at the Weather Underground, and
right.
The Weather Underground tried to blow up the U.S. Capitol. A bomb went off in the U.S. Capitol, and there was tremendous investigations going on to the radical left in those years. And the FBI went beyond, through COINTELPRO, they went on beyond the letter of the law and did these things. And Mark Felt and Ed Miller were convicted, but Stephen Trott felt that they should be pardoned, and Reagan agreed. And the day Reagan was shot was the day that he had on his desk the document to sign pardoning Ed Miller and Mark Felt from their being set from their sentencing, their criminal sentences. And it had to wait until he returned from his recovery from being, attempted assassination there at the Hilton Hotel in Washington. But the day he got back to the White House, he signed this document, and they were pardoned by President Reagan. And so Ed Miller was on first-name basis with Stephen Trott, the Assistant Attorney General. So we went to Washington for the Criminal Division. We went to Washington and met with him, and we took all these newspaper accounts of Billy Saul Estes' testimony before the Robertson County Grand Jury. What happened was Billy Saul Estes testified before the Robertson County Grand Jury. In 1961, when Henry Marshall, the Department of Agriculture official, was killed, the grand jury ruled it was a suicide, even though he had to use a rifle, a bolt-action rifle, to shoot himself in the chest 5 times. I mean, obviously it was not a suicide, but LBJ rigged it, so it was ruled a suicide. But in 1984, based on forensic evidence and Billy Saul Estes' testimony, the grand jury reversed the suicide ruling and made it a homicide. And so we had this information, and we took it that this federal official had been killed, and so Stephen Trott said, well, this is obviously a big case in Texas based on all these newspaper articles, and one of the newspaper articles, headline was the Dallas Morning News, was LBJ Billy Saul Estes links LBJ to the murder of Henry Marshall. And so Stephen Trott said that he needed a proffer, which is he needed a letter from Billy Saul Estes as to what he would testify to if he were granted immunity. And so I went back to Billy Celeste and said, well, now you have to tell me what you know, because we've got to put this in a letter to the Justice Department. Trout had sent a letter to me saying this is what he needed. I showed this to Billy Saul, and so Billy Saul told me what he knew, the outline of what he knew of the various murders that were involved. And the first murder, which the cabal settled upon, the cabal being LBJ, Cliff Carter, Mac Wallace, and Billy Saul Estes, was the first murder was in 1951 of John Kinzer, who was the boyfriend of Josepha, who was a sister of LBJ. Josepha had told him too much about LBJ's secrets, and John Kinzer had too much knowledge about the legal activities of LBJ. And so they dispatched Mac Wallace to Austin to kill him, and he did kill him. He killed John Kinzer, who was a pro at the golf, ran the golf shop at a golf course in Austin. But Mac Wallace was caught before he left Austin, and he told the police officer, "I work for Lyndon Johnson. I've got to get back to Washington." But they arrested him. Eventually, he stood trial. He was convicted of a homicide. Forethought, that he had planned this murder, but the judge gave him a probated sentence of 5 years, and he walked out of court. And that was because LBJ had arranged that behind the scenes. But that was 1951. And in 1961, there were two murders. There's the one of Henry Marshall in Robertson County, but there was also the murder of Josepha, LBJ's sister. Now, in 1984, Billy Solis has told me, and he also told Lucianne Goldberg, who's a literary agent from New York. She was Jonah Goldberg, who's a conservative columnist that appears in the newspapers today. That's the son of Lucianne. And Lucianne was very much involved in the Monica Lewinsky case, bringing Clinton down.
Sure, I remember, yeah.
Okay, but I knew Lucianne Goldberg for many years, and so I invited her to come down and meet with Billy Saul Estes in Abilene, and we did meet with Billy Saul in 1984. I wanted her to be the literary agent for his book, and one of the things we discussed was the murder of this is 1984. Well, what Billy Saul said was, that LBJ had arranged for Josepha to be murdered by giving her a portion of a cake that was poisoned on Christmas Eve. The only other two people that were present at that dinner were John Conley and his wife. Of course, they had no knowledge of this. They were just the guests. But he said Joseph had died the next day, and the following day she was buried, okay? But he told this to me and to Lucianne Goldberg, among other things, okay, that he disclosed that day. But and so a few months ago, of all things, on Facebook, a friend of mine on Facebook, whom I never met, you get friends on Facebook, you never meet them, but she said, I'm a member of Ancestry.com, and I got the death certificate for Joseph, and I'm sending it to you. She sent that to me through Facebook, okay? And I opened it up, and here's the death certificate of Josepha, and it shows she died on Christmas Day, and she was buried on Christmas Day, December 25th. Billy Saul Estes said she was poisoned on December 24th, Christmas Eve. She died, the death certificate shows she died on December 25th, and she was buried on December 26th. And where was she buried? At the Johnson Cemetery on the ranch there.
Oh, brother. You can't even arrange a funeral that quick.
And here it is. Years later, what Billy Saul said is confirmed by, I'd never seen that death certificate. It confirmed by the death certificate. Josepha had to go because she knew too much. Once again, she was an alcoholic. She was on drugs. This was 1961 when LBJ was vice president. At that point, he was probably planning the assassination of Kennedy, which was taken over by, in my opinion, by Majestic 12 and by the CIA and so forth. Johnson was aware of what was going to happen. He was aware of it, and he was in charge of the cover-up afterwards, which he carried out with the appointment of the Warren Commission. Don't forget, on the Warren Commission, he appointed Allen Dulles, who planned the murder, the assassination. He appointed Allen Dulles a member of the Warren Commission, of all people, to appoint the Warren Commission. But in any event, this was 1961, and Joseph had to go. And about 3 years ago, I had to go for my physical, and my doctor told me, well, I want you to go and have your prostate tested. I'm 77 years old, and at that point, this is when I was 74. They want you to have your prostate tested just to examine as just an ordinary thing, So I went, and he referred me to Dr. Axelrod here in Houston. I never met Dr. Axelrod. And I walked in, and Axelrod said, well, I'm glad you got to see me, because in a few weeks I'm leaving for Vietnam. I said, why is that? He said, well, I was a doctor in Vietnam. And then he started cursing Lyndon Johnson. He said, Lyndon Johnson killed all our boys over there. He said that war was not necessary. He said, I had to treat all these poor soldiers with all their wounds and saw them die, and it was all because of LBJ. And he said, when I go to temple on Friday, I get into these fights with my fellow worshipers at temple, because they don't believe that LBJ was this bad, but I can tell you that was this bad. And I can tell you something else. I never met Dr. Axelrod, but he started telling me this, and which I was pleased that he did. Then he said, after I left Vietnam, I came back to a military hospital here in, I think it's in Texas. I'm not sure exactly where. I think, and Sam Houston, who was LBJ's brother, was at that hospital for a whole year. LBJ had stashed him there to keep him out of circulation so that he could not talk about what he knew. And he said Sam Houston would come down to the cafeteria and have breakfast, lunch, and dinner by himself and go right back to his room for a whole year. He was not being treated or anything like that. He was stashed away by LBJ in this military hospital. But I think LBJ said to his brother, you know what happened to Joseph, you don't want that to happen to you, so you better just go to this military hospital and be isolated and keep your mouth shut. But this was Dr. Axel, who was telling me about how LBJ's brother was isolated, kept in isolation, out of circulation for a whole year there in that military hospital. That just shows what a person LBJ is, and now they're trying to. HBO is doing a big show about him. They're trying to, refurbish his reputation, you might say. But I say there is a monument in Washington to LBJ, and it's the Vietnam Memorial. All these boys that were killed, all these men and women that were killed, all our soldiers that were killed, 55,000. That's a memorial to LBJ, so that he and Brown and Root and the oil people in Dallas and all these people, the Texas Mafia, could get rich off the Vietnam War. They got immensely rich, incredibly wealthy off the deaths of our soldiers and of the Vietnamese people too.
So then, what are your politics like today? If you recognize all this, the CIA drug smuggling and all the corruption, do you think there's any difference in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, or there's just no difference whatsoever?
There's a little difference on certain issues, but basically they're both beholden now to corporate America. That's where the money is, especially after the U.S. Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, which makes corporations persons, which gives them, ability to spend a limited amount of money in covert and overt political activity. I mean, that Supreme Court decision changed everything in America. It's the worst decision that ever came out of the U.S. Supreme Court. So I think both parties. I mean, you have Senator Sanders, who's actually an independent, but he's running for the Democratic nomination. He's a socialist, but he tries to expose all of this. But you notice he's been Donald Trump gets all the publicity, and they give very little publicity to Senator Sanders, though he keeps drawing immense crowds wherever he goes. I mean, the people are aware of what he's been talking about. But basically, there's very little. Basically, they're both beholden to the same interests now, to the 1% and to the corporations. There's not that much difference between the two parties.
And so then, you've been around a long time, and in the highest levels of power. How do you think what can we do as citizens to try and overturn this situation and try and get some kind of relief here?
I wish I knew the answer to that. I mean, you turn on television just this evening, you see these, as a result of the George Bush administration, both Bush's administration and the Clinton administration and the Obama administration, You now see the results with tens of millions, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people on the move in the Mideast, refugees fleeing. This is all the result of these horrible policy decisions. And these people in power, they're psychopaths. They're all psychopaths. They could care less about you and me and the average American. They could care less about how many people are killed in Afghanistan. They could care less about all these people that are fleeing, all these refugees that are fleeing for their lives. They're fleeing to Europe. They're fleeing from Libya, from North Africa. They're alien on the boats that sink. These are psychopaths. They could care less. All they're interested in are themselves and the money and the power. And it's very hard to break that now. I mean, they've got the courts on their side. They've got the Congress on their side. They've got law enforcement on their side. I mean, to be honest, I'm pessimistic. I think America has become an evil country. I'm ashamed of our country now. I'm basically ashamed of America. It doesn't represent what I grew up the way it doesn't represent the country I grew up in. I think the Kennedy assassination was a turning point.
Yeah.
And once they got rid of Kennedy, there was no stopping these people from what they wanted to do.
I
wish I had the solution, but I don't.
Well, because so many times, especially we're big fans of Trine Day. We have a lot of Trine Day authors on here, and I had Chris Milligan come on. And I said, I asked him the same question as you, and a lot of times they'll say, "Oh yeah, we just need to vote out the rascals. We just need to vote out, and get a real left going." And I kind of agree with you. That it's a bleak outlook out there. And I'm glad you said that you don't see any difference between who are these guys, Trump and Hillary, or Bush and Hillary. Bush and Hillary are identical. But even Sanders, I'm disappointed in Sanders. I would like to see Sanders in, or I like to see Sanders run, and I'm supporting Sanders because I think that base that he's organizing we can use in the future. But I don't think Sanders. What do you think? Do you think they would ever let Sanders get in?
No, I don't think they will. And Sanders is already saying he feels that the Democratic National Committee has organized the convention whereby he will be frozen out, and Hillary will get the nomination, even though Hillary's popularity within the Democrats and within the general population is dropping day by day. I think she's becoming a less viable candidate each day as each day goes on. And so... And Trump has made it very difficult for the Republicans. I mean, all those other candidates are in his shadow, and so it's really it's a kind of a fascinating election year. Who knows how it's going to turn out?
Well, at least it's fun, It's like watching The Apprentice, Celebrity Apprentice. Because, I'm from New York. I've been watching Trump for years. I got a million stories about Trump. And by the way, too, that brings up the whole thing again too, because we were talking about the pedophilia and the blackmail. You're familiar with the whole Jeffrey Epstein story, right? And his connections to Trump. And I'm sure you're familiar with that story, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm familiar with Epstein, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There is his diary, right? Or, no, it's his address book that has all these names in it.
Right.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but see, that scandal is immense. It exists. It existed under the senior George Bush. I mean, there was a scandal. It was on the Washington Times during the Reagan administration, It was a big issue of call boys were being escorted at night into the White House escorted around, given private tours and everything like that. But they have such power that in this country they managed to cover all that up. And I don't know how you ever break that open. It just takes one big case to break it open, But I don't know what happened, and they'll probably kill whoever it takes to.
How can you get any bigger than Epstein? You got the Prince Andrew, you got Trump, you got all these. How could it get bigger than that?
I know. Yeah, the names in his address book are fantastic, and his private airplane. They have these pedophilia orgies on the plane.
Yeah,
and Epstein is really a spy. He's as maybe Rothstein explained to you, the CIA has its safe houses in New York City, or did, and probably still does, whereby they lure their targets there on sexual ventures, both male and female. Prostitution, and they record them, and then they have them. And And a member of Congress actually appeared on the Power Hour, George Riley's show, and he said I think they have the goods on every member of Congress. Basically, is what he said. I think in other words, there's a book compiled on every member of Congress. If they don't have you on a sexual thing, they have you on a financial shenanigans, on something else. In other words, they don't use this until a crucial issue comes up where they really need the vote, and then they say, you've got to vote this way, or else this will become a public issue. And the way they compromise people has become an art now. I mean, you're a private investigator, and in ancient days it was private investigators, but now, they have wiretaps on everybody. They can read your email. I mean, it's just incredible the way they can monitor anybody they want to do now.
Yeah, we had Henry Vincent on here, Confessions of a D.C. Madam, and he outlined. Yeah, and he was supplying those call boys, and he describes how Craig Spence had Secret Service bodyguards, a detail of Secret Service agents bodyguarding him, and they showed him the room where they did all the wiretap and all the photographing. But now, you've been in these annals of the corridors of power here, right? What about like Satanism or occult practices? Have you ever seen any of that? Any indication of that kind of stuff?
No, I have not. I mean, I don't rule that out, but I have not. I'm not aware. I'm not that much aware of that. The pedophilia thing. I mean, it's so prevalent. I mean, of course, the Catholic Church has been hurt tremendously by it. As so many cardinals have been involved in this. And the present Pope, I think, is doing his best to clean all that up, And I worry about his safety, to be honest, because he's doing so many constructive things. It almost looks to me like he knows that his time may be short. They probably will knock him off, so he's trying to do as many good things as he can before they figure out how to knock him off, whether they poison him or do something else. But I think he's been taking very, very credible measures in the Catholic Church. But the pedophilia thing, that's what intelligence is all about, is getting the goods. Even Putin has talked about that, how the KGB and its successors, well, I know when I visited the Soviet Union in 1974, and it was pretty obvious to me that from the time our plane landed that each of us. I was with a group of lawyers and their wives from Washington D.C. There were about 25 of us, and of attempts to compromise us. We stayed at the Metropole Hotel, and I just had the feeling the entire time. Between each room in the Metropole Hotel, there's another little closet. I mean, literally, between each room, a little closet, I'm sure there are cameras set up inside that closet. It's not just for cleaning materials. It's, you just felt like you're lying in bed sleeping, and they had a camera rolling, I mean, it was so overt in those days, But, when I went off with a few members of our troop to just, off to see something, we were always followed in the Soviet Union by these people, but now it's so much more refined, and they can listen to, they know everything basically. They just know everything.
Yeah, I heard you say when I was listening to the show today, you were talking about how they photograph every piece of mail that goes through the post office. I wasn't aware of that.
Oh yes, they do that. Yeah, absolutely. Isn't that amazing?
It really is.
I mean, everything. Everything is on tape now, and they have this huge. The NSA has this huge structure in Utah. This gigantic building they've erected. But they have entities all over the world. Australia is a major center for all of this, and so forth. And if you were to question these people, what they might say. They might say, we're doing this because there's an alien presence, and we have to do this in order to protect planet Earth. That's what their defense might be.
Back to the alien presence. How come Hunt didn't mention that on his deathbed confession?
Well, we don't know what's in anybody's mind, but I think he felt he was probably not the person to do this publicly. He did this privately to me on a one-to-one basis.
Right.
But he did this on a tape, which he sent to his son, knowing that his son was going to make this public. I mean, he had his meetings with his son and with these people from before about his book and so forth. So that's how he decided to let his knowledge be known. But I don't think he was ready to, on his deathbed, to talk about this. You know, it was not. Howard Hunt took a lot of secrets to the grave with him. Put it that way.
Could imagine. Now, what about you?
And,
have you experienced any kind of threats or harassment and kind of surveillance now that you're coming out with all this stuff?
Just little things, but nothing of great consequence. You know.
Okay.
Nothing of great consequence. I'm uncontrollable, basically. I think they know that I'm uncontrollable, you know,
yeah.
Especially after my recent interview on Dark Journalist, you know. And I am uncontrollable. I mean, I'm a single person, age 77, and there's nothing anybody can do to me, basically, you know. I mean, I'm responsible just for myself. My parents have gone on. I took care of them in their latter years and so forth, and so there's just no, you know, I mean, there's just the threats would not do anything. The threats would go nowhere with me, you know. They would just inflame me, put it that way. I do want to mention a book that has just come out. It just came out in the last few days that I want to recommend to your listeners.
Okay.
It's called The Real Watergate Scandal. It's by Geoff Shepard, Shepard. He was one of Nixon's attorneys. The subtitle is Collusion, Conspiracy, and the Plot That Brought Nixon Down. I just got my copy today. Amazon just got it to me today. I was just reading the introduction earlier this afternoon, and there's an interview with Mr. Shepard you can find on YouTube. He made it at the Nixon Foundation Library about a month ago, in which he explains what his book is all about. But he explains, as I gather, that Nixon got terrible legal advice. Of course, John Dean kept everything from Nixon. But Nixon lawyers were really out of it. In other words, I've told you what Carl Schaffler was up to as a military intelligence agent. That was on the police that arrested the burglars. He was on the Washington, D.C. police, and he had Robert Merritt as his confidential informant. He had everybody wiretapped. And yet none of Nixon's high-flying, highfalutin lawyers, you know, these were these great Constitution lawyers and so forth, none of them ever said, what about this police officer who was parked, it was well known, it was in the papers at the time, this police officer that was parked a block away. Shouldn't we question this police officer why he was parked just a block away from Watergate when the arrest went down? I mean, you know, none of these people had common sense. They were all dealing with these arcane issues, and what they needed was someone who really got in there, a private investigator is what they needed, like you, who would get in there, or a lawyer who would get in there, a criminal law lawyer who would see that, hey, let's take the deposition right now of this police officer and find out what his story is, and that would probably would have saved Nixon. I mean, this police officer would face, Schaffler would have to, by the way, this is in Secret Agenda, which is Jim Hogan's book, Secret Agenda.
Right.
He does talk about Schaffler in the appendices in his book, but he's the only one that does so. But in other words, Nixon could have changed the whole focus of the investigation had they started focusing on Schaffler and Schaffler's relationship with military intelligence and with Bob Wood and so forth. But none of these highfalutin attorneys, they were in the clouds, basically, in my opinion. And so I think I haven't read the book yet, but I have this impression that Shepard feels the same way. I do want to cover one thing here as to why my story is just coming out.
Okay.
Because and my story is just coming out because nobody has ever asked me for my story. Even Shepard never asked me for my story. Nobody, even Jim Hogan, when he wrote his book, a bestseller in 1984, never asked me for my story, even though he talks about me in the appendices. He never contacted me Silent Coup by Lig Kanani, which is a very important book about how the military brought down Nixon, how they had the secret agents going on. They had a secret agent going in the Nixon White House. He photographed thousands of documents out of Henry Kissinger's briefcase that he took back to his bosses at the Pentagon. But nobody has ever interviewed me about Watergate, and so I thought after John Dean wrote his book, The Nixon Defense, that came out a year ago, in which he did not discuss how I had worked for him or how I turned down the hush money. That's why I wrote my memoir that I put on the education forum. I think you're going to put that link up on your program there. Are you not? How people can read my memoir on Watergate on the education forum?
Yeah, that's up already.
Okay, and so I thought now is the time for me. So don't want to, all these books have been written about Watergate, and nobody had the sense, including all the presidents. Nobody ever came down and said, "Well, Doug Caddy, you were the guy who was called in the early morning hours by Howard Hunt. He came to your apartment. You were very, very there at the beginning, and all these things happened to you. Tell us your story." Nobody ever did that. And I find that quite amazing. It shows to me a lack of investigative diligence on the part of these writers and these journalists.
So the only interviews you've done is Dark Journalist and that one I saw you on Cable Access TV in Texas? That's it?
Yeah, on Cable Access, that's right. And the reason Dark Journalist did that was he watched the interview on. It's a public station here for the people of Houston. In Houston, they put me on twice on Watergate and the Kennedy assassination, but it's on YouTube, so it can be accessed by anyone. And so Daniel List, who runs Dark Journalist, watched that when I was talking about Watergate and my final dinner with Howard Hunt, and so he asked to interview me in depth, just as you were interviewing me in depth right now. But I mean, it's really puzzling that nobody, there've been probably a couple hundred books written about Watergate, and nobody has ever approached me. And of course, there've been hundreds and hundreds of books written about the Kennedy assassination.
Right. Well, I got to tell you, hold on to your hat, because everybody we have on this show, they get bombarded with the host trying to book them in the next week. It's usually during the show, they're getting emails and phone calls trying to book them. So you should be hearing a lot of from a lot of at least radio hosts. Well,
between you and the Dark Journalist, I really cover the waterfront. There's very little more than I can disclose. I would say that whoever's trying to contact me, because we've covered a great deal here tonight. Mainly the highlights, I think. I mean, there are always other things to discuss too, but mainly the highlight. The main points. And so I really don't know what I can say to anybody else other than, because we covered here on Dark Journalist everything that needs to be covered.
All right, great. I got an exclusive then. Thank you very much.
Well, you did. You did.
Listen,
yeah.
I can't thank you enough.
I thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show.
No. I thank you so much. You have no idea. And then I screwed up the date and everything, so I cannot thank you enough, my friend. This is just, I'm just so impressed with your career and everything, too. It's just very impressive. And, if my dad knew I was interviewing the Watergate burglars lawyer, he'd be so impressed too. It was such a big part of our life. The Watergate on TV every single day, growing up.
Yeah, Watergate and the Kennedy assassination are the two big criminal cases of the 20th century. And they're intertwined. And even so, most people don't realize that. They're intertwined with the same people.
Yeah, it's a small world. That same little bunch seem to be involved in so much. You're familiar with Operation 40, right? And all those assassinations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, now what do you make of the theory that Barry Seal was on was one of the pilots, getaway pilots for the JFK assassination?
Who was now?
Barry Seal. He was later on.
Barry Seal from yeah. I don't know. I know Barry Seal was murdered. I mean, obviously he knew too much, but I don't know whether he was or not. I don't know that.
Because he was mixed up with that Operation 40 group as well. We had Daniel Hopsicker on the show last week, and he actually lived in Barry Seal's house with his widow trying to investigate that case, and he found that photograph with Sturgis and all those guys, all those assassins sitting in that nightclub in Mexico.
Oh, yeah, where they're all sitting around that table.
Yeah.
And one of them has his coat over his face. I think that's Frank Sturgis.
Right.
Who's in that photograph there. And Frank Sturgis, if you had Rothstein on, Detective Rothstein, you could talk to Detective Rothstein for a whole week, and he'll tell you things that he knows. It's bottomless. His knowledge of so many things is just incredible. But he knows so much about Frank Sturgis.
Oh yeah, well he arrested Frank Sturgis, and Sturgis confessed to him.
Yeah,
I had him on for 4 hours. We had him on twice. And then we talked off the air. We talked off there for like another 2 hours. So,
okay.
Yeah. But now he goes fishing all the time. He's a mayor up there in Wisconsin, wherever that is. And he goes fishing. He goes on these fishing trips. I can never get him back on, but I'd love to get him back.
Yeah, he lives in Minnesota. Yeah.
Minnesota, that's him.
Yeah, but these fishing trips in the winter. In the summer, you go on a fishing trip. In winter, you go out. All the lakes are frozen.
Oh, that's right.
And they go out and they erect this little shack or something like that, and they open this hole in the ice and they fish. And I said, "My God, that's the last thing I would ever want to do." He said, "Oh, it's great." He says, "It's out there. You're sitting in it. It's kind of warm inside there. And you have your pole down in this hole into the lake. And fishing. And I said, "My God, I mean, it sounds like." I don't like cold weather anyway, but the idea of sitting on a frozen lake does not appeal to me. But he does that almost every week during the winter, you know.
I know. Well, I'm in the Nevada desert. I'm in Henderson, Nevada, so 50 degrees to me is freezing.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, are you near where Art Bell is out there?
No, he's down in Prop. It's about an hour and a half away where he is.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, Doug, Caddy, thank you so much for coming on. Like I said, this has just been a wealth of information, and I can't thank you enough.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I wish you and your listeners a happy holiday weekend.
You too, my friend. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, boy. There we had it, man. Doug Caddy. I think that was some of the best information we've ever gotten. Again, ties in with Rothstein, ties in with Phil Stanford we had on. It ties in with Daniel Hopsicker, St. John Hunt. So, I think we're on to something. I think we have solved the JFK assassination here on the Opperman Report with my team of, what do you call it? Our team of guests here, and I would like to take all these shows too: Rothstein, Hopsicker, all these shows we've done on JFK, the Watergate call girl, and put them all on a CD, make them all available to people because this is just great information, and it all ties in. And you can hear different people, all coming up with the same story. All right, guys, so much I wanted to talk about tonight, but this is just great stuff. About that, we'll get into it in the future. Let's see what's coming up. Next week we have coming up this guy. I posted it on Facebook about how all these CIA and these FBI arrests of these terrorists always turn out to be FBI operations with FBI informants, and they're pretty much setting up the cases and then making all the arrests. Let's see, what's his name? It's getting late. I'm tired. But we have him coming on. Guys, please join the members section, okay? We haven't had any new members for a long, long time. We haven't had any donations. And so, really that's what keeps everything going, especially being able to do the extra shows over the weekend, which I really enjoy doing, those extra free shows that we can throw together. Those special shows I do for you, kind of relaxed, on impromptu. That we don't even have a time for it. We just do it Saturdays or Sundays. And the only way I can afford to do that is if the members section keeps growing. And if we get some donations to kind of hold us over. And the other thing, too, is we were accepted, man. There's a lot of stations out there that want us. But unless we bring sponsors with us, we can't get on there. I can get on the whole state of Arizona. It covers 90% of the state. I need sponsors for that. And I can get on this other station that's shortwave, and it's on all these little stations in Tennessee and New Orleans and stuff. So, and there's another thing, too, that picked this up. There's another station picked this up, too, that's on 12 AM FM stations. They all want us. We just got to bring sponsors with us. And once we can get there, if I can just get on there, we'll pick up enough new members that'll pay for all of it. But all these places love the show, and they all want to have the show. A show like tonight would definitely be a big hit. So they all want it. We just we need some funds to get us from here to there. So if you want to sponsor your business, I can get you played all over the whole state of Arizona, 4 or 5 states there, in cities in Tennessee and New Orleans, and then another 12 cities, Las Vegas and Boulder, Colorado, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Florida, Tampa, Florida, a whole bunch, and I think Long Beach, California. So we can get a whole bunch of stuff going out there. Guys, I love you all. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week.